Wise County, Virginia, is a place that feels caught between centuries, where modern roads cut through old mountains and whispers of forgotten traditions linger in the hollows. Margaret Sinclair, a seasoned real estate attorney, had seen every kind of property dispute and inheritance battle imaginable. But nothing, not even her 30 years of practice, could have prepared her for the case of Amberly Morrison and the property she inherited in the shadow of Stone Mountain. What began as a simple legal transfer soon spiraled into something far older, stranger, and darker than the law could ever explain. Margaret first met Amberly in her Wise County office on a rainy Tuesday morning. Amberly was 32, sharp-eyed and exhausted, as though she had been carrying a burden she hadn't asked for. She had inherited a 60-acre tract of mountain land from her late grandmother, Eleanor Morrison, a woman who, according to the town, had been a recluse. The property, an old log house and surrounding forest, lay far up an unpaved road that vanished into the ridges. What made this inheritance unusual were the restrictions written into the will. Eleanor had insisted that the land could never be sold. The house must remain occupied at least 6 months of each year. Certain ritual observances tied to Cherokee traditions must continue, especially on the solstices and equinoxes. If Amberly broke any of these terms, the property would cease to belong to her bloodline. Margaret, flipping through the documents, frowned. "This isn't a standard will," she admitted. "Your grandmother embedded cultural obligations into it. The county might consider this unenforceable." But Amberly shook her head. "Unenforceable or not, I think she meant it. Everyone says she was obsessed with the old ways." Margaret hesitated. She had grown up in Virginia and knew the whispers about the Cherokee who once roamed these mountains, about rituals still carried out in hidden clearings, about spirits bound to the land. Most lawyers would have dismissed it all. But Margaret had lived here long enough to know that in Wise County folklore had teeth. Against her better judgment, Amberly agreed to spend the summer on the land. Margaret drove her up the gravel path to deliver the final papers. The road twisted through thick rhododendron tunnels until the house appeared, a 2-story log structure with moss on its roof and windows like blind eyes. Margaret felt the air grow heavier as they stepped out of the car. The forest seemed to lean inward, listening. Inside, dust lay thick, but everything was strangely intact. Quilts on the beds, canned vegetables lined on shelves, Cherokee dream catchers hanging from the rafters. On the mantel sat a stone bowl filled with ashes and beside it, bundles of sage. Amberly scoffed. Grandma really thought she was some kind of medicine woman. But that night, as Margaret prepared to leave, Amberly looked unsettled. "Stay?" she asked. "Just for one night. I don't want to be here alone yet." So Margaret did. At 2 a.m. she awoke to a sound, a low, steady drumbeat echoing from deep in the woods. She sat upright, heart racing. Amberly burst from her room down the hall, pale. "You hear it too?" They stood together at the window, staring into the treeline. Shadows flickered between the trees like people moving with firelight. Yet there was no fire. Only the rhythmic thrum of drums, pulsing like a second heartbeat through the earth. When morning came, the woods were silent again. Margaret tried to rationalize it. Locals partying in the hills. Sound carries strangely here. But the look on Amberly's face told her she wasn't convinced. Over the next week, Amberly followed the obligations written in the will, partly out of fear, partly out of respect. She burned sage at the hearth, kept the stone bowl filled with fresh ash, and left offerings of cornmeal at the edge of the property. Margaret visited twice to check on her, and each time she found Amberly more withdrawn. "The drums don't stop," Amberly confessed one evening. "They start at sundown. Some nights I hear voices with them, chanting in Cherokee. I don't understand the words, but I feel them, like they're in my blood." Margaret tried to reassure her, though unease prickled at her own spine. "Maybe your grandmother just wanted you to remember the heritage of this land." But one night, Margaret received a frantic call. "Please come," Amberly whispered over the phone. "They're inside the house." Margaret drove up the mountain road with her headlights cutting through thick fog. She found Amberly crouched in the kitchen, clutching a kitchen knife. "They were in the hall," Amberly said, trembling. "Not people. Shadows. They walked past me, and I swear they bowed their heads, like I was supposed to acknowledge them. Margaret searched the house. Nothing. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen lingered, just beyond sight. The will had specifically highlighted the equinox as a night of great importance. And when the autumn equinox arrived, Amberly begged Margaret to stay with her. They built a fire outside in a stone ring Eleanor had left behind. As the sun sank, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No crickets, no owls, no wind. Amberly placed cornmeal in the flames and whispered words from her grandmother's journal. Margaret, though skeptical, felt a prickle at the back of her neck as the flames surged higher than they should have. And then the figures came. From the tree line, silhouettes emerged, tall, indistinct, moving in rhythm with the flames. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with fire but with something older. The drumbeats began again, this time surrounding them, though no instruments were visible. The air vibrated with chanting, ancient syllables that seemed to press into their bones. Amberly clutched Margaret's hand. "They want me to continue this. They've chosen me." Margaret whispered, "Amberly, this isn't law. This is something else. You don't owe them." But before she could finish, the largest shadow stepped forward. It lifted a hand of smoke and ash, pointing directly at Amberly. The chanting ceased. The silence was absolute. Amberly stepped into the circle of firelight, trembling but resolute. "I accept," she whispered. The figure lowered its hand. The flames roared higher, and then all at once, everything vanished. The fire died, the shadows were gone, and the forest came alive with the ordinary sounds of night. In the weeks that followed, Amberly changed. She moved into the house permanently, her fear replaced with quiet reverence. She kept to the rituals, tending the hearth, leaving offerings and marking the solstices. When Margaret visited, Amberly seemed healthier, almost radiant. Yet there was distance in her eyes, as though part of her was no longer fully human. "They protect this land," Amberly explained one afternoon. "Grandma wasn't just eccentric. She was a guardian. Now it's me. The shadows aren't here to hurt me. They're here to remind me of the bargain." Margaret listened, torn between skepticism and the truth of what she had witnessed. As a lawyer, she dealt in contracts and obligations. But this was a contract far older than any court could enforce. And Amberly had signed it with her soul. Years later, Margaret would still drive past the turnoff to Amberly's mountain home. She never went back up, but sometimes late at night, she swore she heard the faint echo of drums drifting down the ridge. Wise County whispered about the Morrison property, that it was alive, that no trespasser ever lingered long, that shadows walked the woods on moonless nights. And in her heart, Margaret knew one thing for certain. Amberly Morrison had accepted more than land. She had inherited the guardianship of something ancient, something watching, something bound to Wise County forever. And that was the story of Amberly Morrison and the haunted inheritance in Wise County, Virginia. Some people say traditions are just folklore, but others believe they're warnings passed down for a reason. If you found yourself in Amberly's place, would you have stayed and accepted the land? Or would you have walked away forever? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss more terrifying true and supernatural tales from across America. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and never ignore the shadows in the woods.